Good morning, everyone. It's Mary, and it's time for another episode of Monday Morning Leadership Bites. And I got to thinking about introversion versus extroversion, and mainly because Easter's coming up and I'm going to be spending time with family. And this may surprise you, but I'm probably more introverted than I am extroverted. Most people who know me or work with me or have done things with me would be surprised by that. And you would even be more surprised if you actually saw me in context of my family. Because overall in my family, we're very passionate. We can be loud. We are huggers. We're debaters. We can be very intense. And if you're introverted, you actually have a hard time hiding, if you will. And so I grew up probably more introverted, but in certain situations, specifically in high school, I learned to adapt to be more extroverted. But I could actually have a tendency to be both. And so this got me thinking about the difference between leaders who are introverted versus who are extroverted. You know, 100 years ago, we actually valued, if not honored and revered, the strong, silent type. So you had people like Abraham Lincoln, who was known for his quiet intelligence and his humility. You had people like Winston Churchill, who could sit in a room and have people debate world issues and chaos, and he could come up with very decisive, firm decisions in the midst of all that. You had people like Albert Einstein, who would spend long periods of time in isolation, away from people, and he was considered one of our most creative geniuses that we have in the modern world. And so it's only in the last 20 to 50 years or so that the tides have turned, and we now have a tendency to recognize or put forth on display the extroverted tendencies. And in the TED Talk by Susan Cain, as well as in her book, she talks about this. She talks about how things have shifted. And even in our educational system, where we're putting people in these teams and collaborative environments, and we're no longer honoring the individual, we're honoring the everyone working together. And there's some, we can debate that good versus not good in terms of that. But it got me thinking about the leadership aspect of an introverted leader. And so you might yourself be saying, are you introverted or extroverted? And one quick way that you might have done Myers-Briggs or DISC or social size or insights, any of these types of personality indicator exams or assessments that you would take, that would tell you what one you are, and more likely it would tell you have everything. You would just lean one way or the other. That you would start one way or you would start another way, and you're probably both, much like myself. And it's in the situations that change where you might say I'm more extroverted, more introverted. And more likely, most of your organization probably has both. And they would probably be 25%, if not more, of the organizations that said they would lean toward introversion. But when we talk about introversion and extroversion, we're talking about the energy. Where do you get your energy? There are people who get their energy by going inward or being in solitude or doing solitary activities or activities in a small group of people. So they enjoy going into the classroom of silence and maybe meditating or going on hikes or doing creative things that are really just to re-energize them, versus there are some people who get their energy by doing external things, being around people, being in large group settings, going out to restaurants or things of that nature. Everybody likes to go to restaurants, but you know what I mean. Being in a social situation, going to a party or things of that nature. But basically, where do you get your energy? Is it inward focus or outward focus? Okay, and so there's a lot more we can talk about that, but that's not really the point. There's plenty of assessments out there that you can determine whether or not you're introversion or extroversion. And I want to talk about the fact that that's a preference and a tendency, not a skill or a limitation. We have a tendency to take this term, introversion, extroversion, and we place skills and abilities on that when that's not true. It's just a preference or a tendency. 40% of leaders in the modern world would be deemed as introverted, and they've been highly successful. So the idea of introversion and extroversion, we have to be careful as leaders, as leading our own people, but even how we term or coin ourselves as those types of things. But I think there are 4 reasons why introverts make great leaders. Number 1 is they do have a great sense of humility. It's about the team. It's about the us. They don't like the limelight. That's just not them. And therefore, they would end up highlighting everyone and they don't tend to take the credit a lot. So that makes them a great leader. Number two is they see the big picture. So there's a myth that introverts are analytical and they go deep and they don't like the more depth than breadth, and that's true and not true at the same time. Is they do ask a lot of questions, and they do want to understand where the data comes from. They do want to understand how it affects the people that are around them, and therefore they will want to go deep. But in those computations of what if, or have we thought about this, they actually are seeing the bigger picture than most people think, and it allows them to manage well in uncertainty. Number three is they have a calming effect on their teams. Much like Winston Churchill, he could sit back in a room and you would almost think he was not interested in what was going on. And when we have a leader like that who's just sitting there and you're thinking, is this person going to participate in the conversation that's going on? They're listening and they're hearing everything you have to say. And it's that ability to just sit and just let it all sink in before speaking. And back to the previous one where they're taking it all in, then they actually have a very calming effect on the team, because once they've taken it all in, they can separate themselves emotionally from what's going on and say, here are the three things I just heard we need to do and how we move forward. And that has a very calming effect on the team. They don't really get fired up as much as most people would, and that's can both a good thing and a bad thing. But I think it can be a strength if used correctly. Number four, they don't micromanage, because they themselves don't like to be micromanaged. They like to have solitude time to think through things, to work through their information, to work through the problem, come up with solutions. They're expecting their teams to do the exact same thing. And so when they gather the group together to say, okay, where are we going? What's our path forward? It's not to check up on your work so much as you did your work, I did my work, now let's move forward. So that makes them great leaders from that standpoint, because they are not micromanagers. So those are 4 reasons why I think introverts make great leaders. Introverts have their own strengths as well as extroverts. They are good at adapting to situations. They are decisive despite what people think. They're assertive despite what people think. All the questions they're asking actually give them a lot more power and information, because they're coming at it because they've got data, or they've looked through how it impacts the customer or the team. And they come with you with all this sort of backup data, if you will, that will make their decisions, once they've made the decisions, really, the solid decisions when they've done that. So bottom line is, when we talk leadership, it really should be about the person's intentions, the person's passion, their competency to lead. And you can get that regardless of the personality type. You can get that in all personality types. So I'm interested. What are you? Are you more introverted or extroverted? What way do you fall? And what gives you your strength as a leader? Go ahead and leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And this has been Monday Morning Leadership Bites.